Okay, so hi. Um, this is my final project for the TLS 306 Youth and Diverse Communities. Um, I will be recording a podcast with a few people that I know regarding marijuana consumption. My name is Jaden. Uh, and would you like to introduce yourself, you guys?
I go ahead. Hi, Ben. Uh, Anything else I should tell about myself? I live in Colorado currently. I'm not crazy.
Hi, my name is Denzel. I'm in Connecticut.
All right, cool. Can you guys please like share any experiences regarding the topic or anything you feel like is important in terms of what needs to be discussed?
As far as like related to marijuana, or like just like what do you want us to like just like a personal experience, or
Actually, yeah, that'd actually be perfect.
um, honestly, like growing up, no, yeah, pretty much growing up my whole entire life. I wouldn't say it's like been like normalized, but I've lived in a lot of like super marijuana friendly states. So it's not really like all that frowned upon, to be honest, other than like older generations. So it's always been like kind of a normal thing for me growing up. Like I personally like don't smoke weed or anything or marijuana, but it's definitely something I don't like frown upon other people for doing, nor have I really like grown up around anyone that frowns upon it. I feel like everyone's taken a fairly educated approach everywhere I've lived. Just like give some insight, I've lived in California, Oregon, Colorado, which are all super marijuana friendly states. So I don't know what Denzel's experience is like. I'm sure yours is fairly positive too, being in Arizona, but yeah.
For the most part, people haven't really looked down on others that smoke weed. Me personally, I smoked a little bit throughout my childhood. I was never heavily into it because I was into fitness a lot. But you know, every once in a while, I would smoke weed with some friends, go to parties, and in general, it's been a positive experience for me in Connecticut.
In terms for my experience, it's similar to Denzel. It's very maybe at a party, maybe with like one or two people that I like absolutely trust. But for the most part, um, I haven't really smoked or um, eaten any edibles. But I know my dad grew up in um, historic Phoenix neighborhood, and he ran with a lot of gangs. Um, or he ran with a gang. So actually, um, any experience that I've gotten is probably from him and my older stepbrother. He's 27, 28, 29, somewhere around there, and he works for well, he smoked during high school, and he actually consumed not consumed. He works security for multiple dispensaries. So like, I know that personally during high school, um, and even in childhood, like middle school, elementary school, we never really discussed marijuana specifically. It's always just kind of been like drugs are bad, um, and so now that we're as we've gotten older, as I've gotten older, um, as a lot of other people have gotten older, it's really different in terms of like like your opinions on marijuana, and I feel like that's definitely changed as I've gotten older. I don't know if it's the same for you guys or if your opinions have stayed the same or if they differed, like I mentioned. So yeah, let me know.
I was also going to mention too. I was thinking about it when you made that point. Um, like although I spent like most of my life in Oregon, like high school versus like going to college, I would definitely say my experience on people's outlook on it was a lot different. Especially being in high school. When I was in high school, it was just when they had just legalized for medical and recreational usage for marijuana in Oregon, and so I like there was like a good chunk of time when I was in high school where um even for like other students, I think like not really like frowned upon it per se, but it was like, oh no, marijuana is like a really bad thing you shouldn't do. Where like I think by the time I left school, it was one of those things where like if you were 18 and you were doing it responsibly, it was a good thing. But I mean, it was hard to kind of make that connection because there was also a lot of kids too, right? That like probably my first couple years of school that were smoking marijuana that they were doing it illegally, obviously. So as a result, I mean, in like the lightest sort of sense, I guess it was almost like a gateway drug for them because now a lot of those, I mean, not a lot, but a decent percentage of those kids that were doing that when it was illegal, it was kind of their gateway to do other sort of drugs. But like, it's just kind of weird the evolution that's kind of gone under between like the last like 5 or so years from like then, and then I moved to the other part of the state, living in like a college town. To give some perspective, I lived in Corvallis, which is Oregon State University, and super pretty liberal community for the most part, other than like the people that grew up there. But I would say like most of the community, even the more conservative people, were pretty open minded to the idea of marijuana, even if people didn't partake in it, because there is a lot of marijuana growth in Oregon, and so as a result, like not only was it good for it was good for like the overall like mental health of the community, I would say, but also like as far as like an agricultural commodity, it's actually really really good as a state as a whole. There's a lot of money to be made and a lot of opportunities to be seen there. So like the perspective on it has definitely changed like throughout my life, especially growing up. I feel like I was definitely like all the time like in the middle of a lot of like the change of perspective on marijuana. Right, for sure. Well, see, and that's the other thing too, right? Is it's hard to say, right? But like, um, so like right now I'm in Denver, right? But I would say, like honestly, I have how do I word this? Obviously, just because of where I live and stuff, and obviously me being white in general, I would say that I probably have more friends that are of white backgrounds just by default, just because of where I live and my circumstance. But I would actually probably say it's probably a 50-50 split of the minorities that I am friends with that do smoke or don't. Or the more common thing I would actually say too is, especially in Colorado and Oregon, since medical marijuana was legal for so long before recreational use was legal, is I know a lot of people that actually use like gummies or vitamins, those sort of things too, and that seems to help them a lot as well. In fact, I probably know just as many people that do that as opposed to smoke marijuana by itself. Um, so yeah, I definitely think the definitely growing up in like a more like rural like white community when I was younger definitely had like a little bit different of a perspective, but um,
Um, uh,
just yeah, just grow. Oh, go ahead.
so I'm like, it's got to be because you grew up in such a rural area that people were able to get away with so much more in terms of growing. Probably.
Oh, 100%. So, it's funny you mentioned that because, so where I grew up in Oregon, it's super close to like the Idaho and Washington border, and so, which, which because of that, there was actually a lot of, I wouldn't say like gang activity. That's definitely not how I describe it. But there was a lot of rural areas where these people would just grow marijuana for whatever medical, whatever the reason was. But because uh, Oregon had legalized growth or whatever of marijuana, just recreationally before either of those states did, there's a lot of people that would grow it in Oregon but then transport it to Idaho and Washington. So that was like a really debatable thing for a long time too. Now, obviously, it's not really so much of an issue. It is still an issue in Idaho because, to my knowledge, I'm not 100% sure about this, but I'm pretty sure recreational use is not allowed in Idaho. But I think medically it is legal in Idaho. I would have to double check. But I know, right, exactly. And Idaho's known for being fairly conservative, so that's why they've had a lot of those issues and stuff in the past. But yeah, I think that's like one of the bigger things that arose just from being in the community, specifically that I was in. Um, but yeah, I mean, honestly, it's like the perfect environment to be able to grow and stuff. So yeah, definitely growing it recreationally and selling and stuff, regardless of whether it was illegal or legal at the time, was definitely. And honestly, very little to no risk, unless you lived in the city, then that might change a little bit. But to be honest, I don't. I mean, it wasn't anyone growing like greenhouses worth of. If that makes not that I was not that I was aware of by any stretch, but maybe like a few plants like on their windowsill or something like that, or maybe like a small
Maybe
garden
something
or
for like
whatever. But
aesthetic purposes or aesthetic purposes
right,
just to
right, for
have.
sure. But nothing, yeah, nothing along the. Well, I don't. Maybe more than aesthetic. I would say like enough to where they could sell a decent amount. Yeah, maybe more like enough to sell a decent amount of people, but they weren't like they weren't like growing them in greenhouses or whatever and loading them up by the van and taking them over to like I don't know Seattle or
Just put
something.
them
Let's
on a
say.
bus, send them
Yeah,
to
well, I
Mexico.
mean, yeah. Well, the other thing I was gonna say too is, um, I feel like having that conversation with your kids probably makes it more like less likely that they would be wanting to experiment. Because really, a lot of kids at that age, I think and you could say this for so many things, but I think marijuana is a big one nowadays, to where a lot of younger people really only want to experiment because they just really don't know any better because they've really never had that conversation with their parents or really schools either. Because I do think, at least when I was in high school, I don't know what your experience was. Jane, yours might be a little bit different because you were in high school a little later than I was, but um, this marijuana was just something that really wasn't talked about in high school. Not unless you were in some sort of like health studies class.
Health class, yeah.
Um, yeah, but like really, my only experience with that was like freshman year and like junior high, and that was just so. I mean, to give some insight, my freshman year would have been like 2010, 2011, and then junior high was a little bit earlier, and that was just so not so long before, but long enough before marijuana was legalized to where everyone just kind of expected you shouldn't do this. This is bad for you, and like there's no positive outlook. To where now I think there's a lot of positive that I could probably be said about it. But again, I mean, none of us are in high school, so we can't really speak to this. But there's just not really that much education given to children, and to really make an informed decision whether that's a good decision for them or not.
Well, what's crazy is that um we didn't really even talk about it in middle school either. Like I think the only thing we would ever do is like elementary, middle school. We do like you tie the red ribbon and you do you pledge to never do drugs. But we talk about it for not even like an hour really. It was just like always like drugs are bad, stop it. And then but like I mean we do we'd have an assembly
Right.
where you split up into boys and
Sounds
girls
like one
Which
of
is
those old
totally
beer
and they'd
classes.
literally go over I mean
right.
sex education for the most part, like early sex education because you'd hit puberty, and it's like, this is what these are, this is what this is, and we just laugh about it because I mean, we're boys. It's funny, but like, there was no conversation about it as much.
Which is a which is a lot. I will say this too. It's good you bring this up with like the sex education, the drugs, and all that kind of stuff. I would definitely say, as far as getting any sort of education on that kind of stuff, I mean, we are definitely in the minority. I mean, I there's a lot of kids I've talked to between college and just like adult life in general, where I'll ask, like, hey, like I don't straight up ask them, but sometimes you could just kind of tell by their social interactions and stuff that they probably did not have that same sort of education in school. And I grant that probably to me going to a smaller school to be honest, because there's just more opportunity there for that kind of stuff and more one-on-one interaction with students. Um, but I think in bigger schools, it's just there's just so many other things that the schools probably have to focus on that's just not really worth the time.
Yeah, I know in my school, which is a pretty decent sized school, maybe we talked about weed for like 30 minutes, sex education for maybe a day, which one class is 45 minutes. So, like, the conversations weren't really, you know, they didn't give us a lot to learn about all that.
I feel like I don't know if this is the same for you guys or at all, but like I don't know, like we didn't have these conversations to like kind of put it down, maybe the experimenting, but as soon as like 7th, 8th grade, I mean, there were kids that were already like smoking and doing all kinds of stuff like vaping in the bathroom. I mean, like when you think about it, when you're going into high school, you're like 14, 15 years old. But I mean, it's only a summer. Like it's only a 2 month span where you're like beginning to experiment from like end of 8th grade to like beginning of freshman
Yeah.
year. And it's just and like that span of months, especially as a young
I feel
person, a lot can change for you.
I feel like freshman year they should really crack down on those kind of talks. Because definitely high school time, that's when the kids are experimenting. They're doing this, doing that, going to parties where they're definitely gonna get exposed to weed, alcohol, drugs. Because I know at least 1 out of 3 kids that I knew in high school smoked weed. They drank, and then half of those kids, they did fucking LSD, acid, shrooms. It's like, but
Um,
and
I mean,
health class or nothing. They never really talked about any of that.
and I could probably say the same too. I mean, not for like all the other drugs because that's crazy, but um,
That's how it felt.
well, yeah, it's just to be honest. I mean, sometimes the authorities just to make it a solid point to like stop that kind of stuff. To be honest, it's just a chain, right? Because it's just like the kids aren't getting the education, the police aren't really handling it as well as they should, and it just becomes like it becomes a chain reaction of just really, really bad things happening in the community that aren't really being solved.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I would definitely. I mean, yeah, as long as the same numbers, I'd probably say 1 out of every 3 kids I went to school with definitely smoked marijuana. For alcohol consumption, it's probably more. If you want to be honest, it's probably 1 out of every 2. Seems crazy, but I mean, I'm not saying they were like alcoholics or anything by that stretch. But I
But
mean,
they at least
definitely,
had
definitely,
alcohol once.
right. Oh, for sure, for sure. So, yeah,
I
like
definitely think it's the
100%.
opposite for me. Actually, I feel like there were more kids that were like smoking. It was probably like every 2 out of 3 kids probably smoked marijuana or consumed marijuana in some sort of fashion, and then 1 out of 3 were drinking. Just because I think, I mean, there's a lot of people I knew that was just like, hey, my cousin he just came from Mexico and he brought some
It's,
Yeah,
stuff. So it's
I thought you
just
oh,
about that being a
smuggling
thing.
now. All right.
it's was just I don't know why it's just easier, in order to get our hands on marijuana than it was on alcohol. Now, how do you feel? How do you guys feel like it would be with the legalization of marijuana? I'm pretty sure it's 21. How do you guys think it's safer that um, it'll be safer for kids even if they were to get their hands on it um, now after post legalization versus like um, it not being legalized?
Well, like I feel like it'd be safer. Like, let's say I'm hanging out with my homeboy. He's like, "Yo, give me $15," and my brother will go buy weed from the dispensary. I'd feel safer doing that than buy from a guy that I met maybe one other time. Because there's definitely been times where friends of mine they smoked stuff that was laced with stuff. I've I've smoked something that I thought my boys bought something safe. They end up buying what was that stuff called K2 K12 or something, which definitely isn't regular stuff, and I was not having a good time. It wasn't anything that I'd do ever again. So kids definitely don't know the dangers about all that. And I've had this one friend tell me that she used alcohol in her bong instead of water, and I later found out that you could get lung poisoning from that, and it's just like people just don't know. They keep doing stuff like that, and oh,
I I I I can say in my experience though, the longer, well, I could say for both states because they're pretty similar, but I can definitely say in both Oregon and Colorado, the longer weed has been legal, the more educated it seems more about like the whole entire topic as a whole, even people that um 21 years. So I feel like the longer it becomes normalized, the more and more people are going to be educated on it. I mean, hence you could even say because of this class. I mean, this is the perfect example. Something that I don't think would have been extremely normalized, 10 years ago, let's say. But I think now it's just, I think people are realizing there's so much benefits to marijuana usage as well as downfalls. I mean, as does everything when it's abused. Um, but yeah.
So, according to an article I found from Rutgers University in New Jersey, they did a study where they had found that people that
yeah,
um, were normal, like everyday smokers of marijuana, or consumers, I guess, because they didn't specify edibles or smoking, that um, they were not as likely to pursue post secondary education, and um, casual smokers and abstainers um, were very, very similar, except that um, casual users would actually, there's a high chance that they would, from their study, um, that they would actually wait and apply later for post secondary education most of the time. So my follow up question would be like, where do you fall under that category, um, and and all that?
Yeah, so I can start. Um, so yeah, I had a fairly typical education. Just went all the way through high school, and then yeah, I have my bachelor's right now. Yeah, considered master's, never did it. And so went to school for 5 years. Yeah, 5 years after high school.
All right, all you Denzel.
uh, I completed high school, but that's about it. Never planned on going to college for any reason.
So as like a final question, um, uh, why do you why do you guys think that hitting like really coming to university, you're more able to, not even more able to experiment more, but you want to experiment more. I personally think that a lot of times I've wanted to experiment with different things because of the fact that I'm independent. I'm away from my family. Becoming coming from such a my cultural background, where just my family's in my life all the time. Just being able to sit here and be independent and be someone else away from them was really nice.
Um, to kind of like second that, I was also gonna say I also think our generation particularly um sees a lot more because really the big two things when you go to college, right? As far as like trying new stuff, and it's the same in high school, but I think it really elevates to another level in college. Just because you're not living with your parents, right? But like the two things is like trying alcohol and doing drugs, but mostly marijuana. I would say I don't know if that many kids that go off to school and their secondary education smoke or not smoke weed, but do other drugs other than marijuana. Really, in most cases, then they might, but I think that's usually the first drug that they're going to do is they haven't already before. But I do think our generation normalizes smoking marijuana a lot more than drinking alcohol, just because I think people have started to realize that although both in moderation are completely fine in my opinion, um, there's a lot more of a downside with alcohol than there is with marijuana, where like alcohol has all these other negative effects other than obviously just your brain, but you have to deal with all the calories you deal with you know with with anything alcohol related, and then you have to deal with, or you got to deal with your liver or whatever other part of your body might be affected by marijuana. So I think our generation just having a little bit more of that inside education, I think I've just kind of made a mutual decision that I think marijuana is probably better for your health overall. Now, does everyone agree on that as far as their age group? I don't think so, but that's just been mostly my experience. Is that I think our generation tends to normalize a lot more uh, smoking or just doing anything recreationally marijuana related a lot more than drinking alcohol. Or I wouldn't say drinking alcohol is like frowned upon per se by anyone in our generation, but I would definitely say that they know that there's a lot more negatives to it than comparably to marijuana. And I don't know what your guys' experience is like that, but that's just been my personal experience, regardless of where I live. That's basically been everywhere at this point, especially in college. It seems like college kids, like, I mean, most of them do both, but I would say if they were going to choose one or the over the other that they were going to do, probably for the long haul, it would probably be marijuana, just because marijuana has a lot more of a positive impact than alcohol does, with a lot less of drawbacks related wise.
I hope that you guys enjoyed the podcast episode thing that I decided to do. I thought it would be creative and fun, and it actually really was. So I hope you guys enjoyed as much as I did. Thank you.